1.6 million people locked in jail. They the new slave labor force trapped in hell. Damn. They generate over $1 billion worth of power and only getting paid 20 cents an hour. They make clothes for McDonald's and for Applebee's and working 40-hour shifts in prison factories. And while we sit around debating who to whack MCs, they have to work when arthritic pain attack the knees. Is life worth living if you living in hell? When the mind is confined to a prisoner cell, and the lies they devise in a system that fell. But I expect the system to fail. Is life worth living if you living in hell? When the mind is confined to a prisoner cell, and the lies they devise in a system that fell. But I expect the system to fail.
Hey ICE, can't you see your jails are breaking families? Hey ICE, can't you see your jails are breaking families? Immigration is not a crime, so why are people doing time? 10 cities, shut it down. Port Isabel, shut it down. ICE raid, end it now.
Se tiene que salir. Aplauden, aplauden, no dejen de aplaudir.
¿Te queremos? ¿Cuándo? Detención no, dignidad sí.
Ahora, ¿qué queremos?
Justicia.
¿Cuándo?
Ahora.
¿Qué queremos?
Justicia.
Today we're here and we're going to turn in a petition that has been signed by the immigrants at Port Isabel Detention Center who have been on a hunger strike ever since Martin Luther King Day, ever since the march against Sheriff Arpaio, against the impunity of this government when it comes to immigration rights, and the man who has ordered violence and repression against those immigrants is sitting inside this office, inside that building, because that is what we were told, that Michael J. Pitts ordered for ICE violence to occur 2 weeks ago and target hunger strikers who have been living in fear of their lives ever since that repression occurred.
¡Alto a la guerra contra los migrantes! ¡Alto a la guerra contra los migrantes! ¡Alto a la guerra!
So what needs to happen is that people like Michael J. Pitts need to understand that people do have human rights. We all have human rights. Immigrants are humans, immigrants have rights. They need to start respecting that. Michael J. Pitts needs to stop the repression against immigrants at Port Isabel Detention Center. We want the beatings to stop, we want the violence to stop, and we want it to stop now. We know that turning in these names with the petitions is going to leave people up to more repression, and we want them to be held responsible because these orders are coming from San Antonio field office, Michael J. Pitts. So that's our message to him. We don't want anybody on this list that we're going to be turning into this office today to come under any kind of violence, oppression, or abuse of the consequence of their complaints, because that would be considered repression. And it's already been abusive. It's gotten worse when the people started hunger striking, and they escalated with ICE violence about 2 weeks ago. We want it to stop. We want it to stop now.
Welcome to San Antonio. We're here in solidarity with all the immigrant rights movements fighting for our rights.
What's really special about this day is that we have people from many different communities that are here, and we are very happy to have Reverend Smith here to give us a little of her perspective.
Immigration is an issue of human dignity. Detention centers have not, do not, and will never affirm this human dignity. Dignity, not detention. Close the Tent City Detention Center in Raymondville and close the Port Isabel Detention Center. The United Methodist Church affirms the worth, dignity, and inherent value and rights of all persons regardless of their nationality or legal status. Jesus' presence on earth initiated the kingdom reality of a new social order based on love, grace, justice, inclusion, mercy, which meant to replace the old order characterized by nepotism, racism, classism, sexism, and exclusion. The broken immigration system in the United States and the xenophobic responses to migrants reflect the former social order. The calling of the people of God is to advocate for the creation of a new immigration system that reflects Jesus' beloved community. We call the United States government to immediately cease all arrests, detainment, and deportations of undocumented immigrants, including children, solely based upon their immigration status until a fair and comprehensive immigration reform is passed. Any legislation to reform the U.S. immigration system must affirm the worth, dignity, and inherent value and rights of migrants, and must also include the elimination of privately owned detention centers and the elimination of indefinite detention.
We're really calling this campaign Dignity Not Detention. It's fantastic that folks are out here today to be a part of it. There are actions happening in Arizona, in Georgia, in New York, in Los Angeles. There's several other groups across the country sending out press releases supporting this because we want to put a cap on this system and reform it from within. In 2008, over 311,000 immigrants were detained, and last year it was estimated that at least 440,000 people were in ICE custody. And since 2003, 2 million people have gone through detention. 2 million people with families, 2 million people who have children, who have parents, who, and just like President Obama, have hopes and dreams. And they've been caught up in this system that is really creating suffering for their communities, for their families, for their livelihoods. And like we said, alternatives are less costly. It's $99 a day to hold people in detention, if not more in some places. Alternatives cost $12 a day, up to $21 a day, but they're less costly. The one thing we want to note is that for alternatives, we don't want punitive alternatives. We don't want ankle shackles. We want community-based alternatives similar to Casa Marianella in Austin, which is a great example of a community-based alternative program. Right now in New York, people are speaking out in support of the campaign here to shut down Port Isabel, shut down Willisey, because their family members are locked up inside.
As we stand here today, there are over 10,000 beds in Texas, in this state, in our state, that ICE has set aside to tear families apart and dehumanize immigrants with horrible conditions, lack of due process, and the invisibility of detention. Many of the beds are making millions of dollars for private corporations, like Corrections Corporation of America, the GEO Group, and the Management and Training Corporation. People are being shipped from all around the country to Texas's giant facilities like the Tent City and Port Isabel detention centers in South Texas, where they are locked up in conditions unfit for any human being. These two facilities hold over 4,200 beds and house over 10% of the immigrants in this country who are being held for civil immigration charges. ICE is committing human rights violations by incarcerating tens of thousands of immigrants in remote detention centers far away from their families, support networks, and lawyers, and any oversight. Less costly, more humane alternatives exist that ensure safer communities and uphold core values of dignity, due process, and democracy. ICE is choosing to ignore these alternatives. While ICE has acknowledged that their detention system is broken, they have done nothing to correct it. We are here today to demand that ICE makes good on its promise to fix this broken system. We will no longer live in fear that our communities will be raided, torn apart, detained, and abused. We are here today to tell Michael Pitts, the regional director of ICE, that we will not stand for this for-profit criminalization and incarceration of immigrants. We are here to demand that ICE restore justice, freedom, and democracy in our state. Shut down Tent City, shut down Port Isabel. We demand dignity, not detention. Dignidad, sí. Detención, no.
This is the pain. This is the pain. These are the signatures, and these are the people that have been tortured, that have been beaten, that have been humiliated by the system. And we don't care, personally. I don't care if the system says that immigrants don't have human rights. Anybody that tells me that, really, I don't want to even, I really don't care. I don't want to hear it. Immigrants do have human rights. Immigrants should have human rights, and that's what this is about, restoring human rights to immigrants and to everyone who is a human being, regardless of immigration status, regardless of race, regardless of poverty, because that is what we are about. And this is the pain, this is the suffering, these are the tears of the families, this is the suffering of the people that were beaten 2 weeks ago, that were bloody, that were called big and black, and that's why they were being punished. This is what it's about. And those orders were coming from Michael J. Pitts, who is sitting at his office, very comfortable in an air-conditioned room, while other people are being tortured, are being threatened with force feeding,